Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
Hello, this is Chris Parker, and we're back with Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. And I have to admit that interviewing and speaking with Nick Van Heck somehow makes me a little bit nervous. And I'll explain that why. Because, well, Nick has been a coach and a mentor and a guide for me, and has been so, I think instrumental in my success throughout my career. And have been delighted to, actually contribute and invited occasionally into, his coaching teams, which for me is an absolute delight because I really have to stand on my toes and work with that caliber of people. Nick, would you please, our starting question is, who are you and what do you do and why do you do what you do?
That's the most interesting part. Well, first of all, Chris, I mean the pleasure is shared to be here. As you said, I'm Nick Van Heck. I've been coaching, advising, supporting business leaders in all sorts of businesses over the last 25 years. And why am I doing that? Because I'm actually going to start from that. Is I've always been intrigued since I was actually studying economics that I was fascinated by the fact that some businesses seem to be having an aura of success and seem to be doing all the right things at the right moment in time with the right brand, products, whatever you can think of. Some of them can do that for a couple of years. Some of them seem to be doing that forever, at least. That's how it sometimes feels. While some other businesses who seem to be run by equally smart people, assumption, I know, but certainly equally educated and seem to be having the same degrees, also seem to be putting a lot of effort and thinking behind making the right products and serving their clients, etc. But somehow they do not get to that place. They seem to be muddling through. They don't need to necessarily be not successful, but they seem to be, like average. They don't get out of the pack, really. And I've been fascinated ever since. That's why actually I was interested in studying economics. Is what makes the difference between one type of companies versus those other types of companies? And to be honest, I haven't found a conclusive answer just yet.
I was hoping you were going to tell us the secret.
I'm sure. I've got some ideas, which probably also says something about who I am and how I look at the world. But I find for me, this is an ongoing journey of finding out yet to a final level, yet to a different level, or what makes that difference. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I really look at organizations as social constructions with economic objectives. And I find it intriguing to be looking at both sides of things. I mean, it's a social construction. In the end, no matter, how you look at a business, the human aspect in decision making, in setting direction, in rallying people around an idea, a purpose, whatever. There's a lot of social aspects in that. We like to look at businesses as in a very rational way, but there's many rational aspects of it, but it's a fascinating human social construction. And secondly, there is that economic objectives. There's certain rational. There's certain things that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. And no matter how you look at that, so it's that fascinating. And this is why I call myself a behavioral strategist, or some people would say you're a strategic behavioralist. Well, whatever angle you take, but I'd like to look at the psychological behavioral components of it in conjunction to the strategic business direction setting components, because this is where my hypothesis is those who actually have that aura seem to be finding a way to bring this together. Where there's no rule book for that, there's no cookbook for it. It's probably not even fair to call it an art. It's a bit more of how do you say this, craftsmanship, of
Hmm.
finding, and I find that fascinating because every time you meet a new business or a new constellation, there's something else that's fascinating, and there's a different history, background, personalities, and still you need to find the magic, the chemistry to make it work. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I like the human aspect of it, and I like things to grow, to build, etc., etc. And yeah, so
But
and that's how we met, and so yeah, and.
yeah, we met quite a few years ago, and I was on a sort of an executive leadership program, and I think you and your team were actually even coordinating that whole program.
Correct.
So share with, I guess, the audience, because I'm a bit more familiar with what you're doing, but your company and how that works with these constellations of humans to um, get them, moving in a different way and looking at things from a different lens.
Yeah.
Can you describe that? Basically, what your product and service a bit?
Well, what we like to believe is that, in light of that social construction, we consider ourselves a bit of architects of creating the social construction that will generate the economic objectives that
Mm-hmm.
we aspire to have. And I find it really important to put myself or ourselves as a team into that architecture role, because there is the owner, there is the builder, whose budget it is, whose piece of land it actually is, and who will make the final judgment calls, but probably
Mm.
finds it useful to have an architect who can guide him or her through that.
Mm.
And so for me, it's that continuous, so growing is a continuous process of becoming better, because competition catches up, customer requirements are evolving. What is new today, tomorrow is taken for granted, and that requires businesses to continuously grow. And as they grow and therefore become more, create more value for their customers, they will also grow in size, because more people become a fan and therefore buy the product or buy more of the product, or are willing to pay more for it. And as a consequence, yes, that will translate also in numbers growth, but I don't think that's really where the growth actually comes from. The source of growth is becoming better,
Mm-hmm.
is creating more and better value for the customers out there. And so what we do is, what in the traditional market, people would actually say you're a strategy consultant, you're an organizational development consultant, you're a leadership development consultant. Um, I cannot deny that. The answer is yes, we do all of that. But I'd like to look at those things as interventions in the spirit of the space for growth, and
Mm-hmm.
uploading some sort of a growth muscle into an organization, which again has to do with how we look at the world, opportunities we see, but also how we interact with each other, how we make decisions, how we translate them into actions and resources, and then how we embed it in
Mm.
how we do things. And that's a fascinating thing, because it never stops. I keep saying, there's a couple in every organization. There's a couple of moments in the year where we probably could play a role, accelerate, the growth, and for some organizations, we end up doing exactly that.
Yeah. So I'm also thinking on behalf of the audience here that who might not be familiar with some of the terms, like strategic uh, consultants and organization design and behavioral, strategists and things like that. So um, can you paint a picture of what maybe maybe an existing customer, or what is your ideal customer
Uh-huh.
for your agency, and then what would you, what was the problem that they're having, and then how would you architect a solution for them?
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Well, let me give maybe two extreme examples,
Yeah.
because if I take one, it's as if this one is iconic, and therefore that's the only thing we do.
Mm.
I'll take the example of a scale-up organization that was in a production. Then what they actually do is they make glass. Actually, they put not the glass to put into frames in houses, and the company was bought by a couple of investors, and after 4 or 5 years, they were doing pretty well. But they also realized there was some untapped potential into the business. And in fact, some of the shareholders wanted to step out and some new ones wanted to step in. So we started interacting with the executive team to say, hey, how can we build a solid but also engaging investment story for how we're going to take this business from where it is today to what it could become in 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took a whole journey where we start looking around what's going on in the world around, what's going on in the world of construction, what's going on in the world of glass. We really scanned the whole territory, but not just as in, putting data, but really experiencing it ourselves. We went to see things together as an executive with the executive team. And out of that, we actually find out, there's some major developments happening in the market. And then we actually started brainstorming on at least 5 strategic directions we could take the company in. And that was already mind-blowing for them. It's like, are you really serious? Yeah. And some of them were not appealing to the executive team because they said, well, that doesn't sound sexy to me. Well, sexiness is not a criterion right now. Let's really look at what could we possibly do. We're not making a choice yet on what we're going to do, but let's at least look at what we could do with this business in the next 5 years. And then we scanned those 5, actually, interestingly, some of them that were very unsexy at the start became much more sexy the more we started exploring them. And then we started, developing some criteria and then deciding on which of those options were really valuable and which ones we decided not to take. And out of that came a really, an interesting story, an investment story that was lived by that executive team. So it wasn't just, PowerPoint sheets that were, making financial projections. If you buy 100 now, we can make it into 200. Yes, there were some of that at the end. If we buy 100 now, we think we can turn it into. But it was much more, let's take them into the story of what we could make this company in. And the executive team was able to relate that with a certain energy, passion, conviction, because they had lived through the entire discovery process of what do we really want to do with this business. And as a consequence, the reinvestment process, which they initially thought was going to be challenging, it was not challenging at all, because they really found 2 investors who immediately said, well, you know what, we're going to take a bigger share because we really believe in the story. And so it became it was a refinancing of the company that was being done. And then we mobilized the wider management team underneath the executive team into this, and we're guiding them towards really implementing this strategy now. Because once you've actually agreed on this is where we're going to take this company, these are the sorts of activities and sort of products we're going to create, then we really need to make sure that we also translate that into the different ways of working that this requires, and also the leadership that is needed in some pivotal roles. And so we're coaching some of those people in those pivotal roles, but not coaching as in we take them out of the business, and we send them into a separate room for some discrete coaching sessions, but much more on the job. What's going on? Who are the people you need to, steer and guide? What are the difficult conversations you need to have, et cetera, et cetera. So really on the job, so they can actually grow that business in the direction that they want to, which is, anyway, it's been a lot of fun because we also created that trust relationship.
What it feels like to me as I'm listening is it's sort of you, I can't say pulled out, but you allowed them to discover from within them as people, going back to this human organization domain on to discover that there are in fact options and scenarios, and then guided them to make it. And it sounded like it was a very natural, almost self-evident process at some point, as opposed to sometimes when more traditional consulting companies come in, it's very analytical, they crunch the numbers, they have a large deck of slides, and then the CEO receives this deck of slides, turns to slide 512 and says, okay, we're going left.
According to this slide, we're going left here.
And people are going, what, why? Because the slide says we're going left. Of course, that's a bit of a dramatic simplification, but and what is the other extreme
Just 1 second here because there's somebody knocking on the door. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me.
So we'll see what he has delivered at the door. Maybe it's some sort of surprise guest. I think I will actually do some editing on this one.
The joy of hotels.
The joy of hotel. So I just have, typically I don't edit these things, but some of this I will trim out.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So that's okay.
But I think, Chris, what you just said is there is again that sort of emotional, and I know this sounds esoteric, but it's actually not at all, or it may sound, because it's not at all. There is that sort of emotional process of really, in that whole discovery process. Decision is what am I willing to open myself to this possibility? What risk am I willing to take? If we're debating this together, who's right or who's wrong? Because actually there's nobody's right or nobody's wrong, because nobody can actually, you can find a lot of data, but the data will never tell you whether you will be successful with this. So it's a very judgment process where individuals actually sometimes are confronted with their own way of looking at the world. So it's exactly in that process, which is combined with indeed an analytical process of, wait a minute, does this make sense? I mean, do the numbers add up? So there is, both sides are actually there, but it is that process. And once you've lived through it, literally, and not because you've read through the slide pack, but you lived through that process, you will have a far different relationship with the outcomes of that, and how you can bring that across, in this case, to the investors.
Yeah, and living through the process. I love those words, because it's almost like you're in it. Yeah. There's a bit of a. Sometimes I ask people to think more how they work on their business as opposed to in the business, and it looks like what you do is sort of flip between the two, because you can't take an emotional abstraction away too much, because at some point you have to be in it, and you actually have to live and be that change as a leader. And so it's sort of both sides of that. So what is the other extreme?
Well, I'm not sure it's an other extreme, but this is the other example is a business in Asia, which you've also heard of before, Chris. It's a business in Asia. It's been well established, been around for 30 years, been growing really fast over the last 5 years. In fact, I would say the numbers have actually grown faster than the organization really has, in terms of the capabilities, in terms of the human resources in all aspects of that. And so the whole process started with the CEO actually saying, "Hey, I'm turning 65. I feel that I don't have the energy, at least not for the next 5 to 10 years anymore, to keep growing and building this business. However, I'm not ready, because I've been CEO now for more than 15 years of this business. I'm not ready to let it go either, because I care so much about it. This is my baby, literally. So I need to find a way to make myself redundant in this business, so it's easier for me to actually step down as the CEO and maybe have some sort of a board role, advisory role. I will always probably want to be connected to it, but I need to find a way to distance myself from that, which is, again, it's a very human process of a lady who's been building the business, being so much the figurehead of the business, but as a consequence also has to some extent become the bottleneck in driving the growth of the business. And at the same time, it's also building the next generation version of their business model, of their organization, their ways of working, their leadership, the value they actually create for their customer base out there, because she also wants to do that at the time that the market is really changing really fast. So again, there is a There is a business side, there is a strategy, an organizational, a leadership component, and then there is the person of the CEO and her relationship with the people inside the company that needs to evolve and shift. And that guidance, that process of, what do we do when? Because it's not as simple as, oh, okay, let's create the profile of the next generation CEO. Let's find a headhunter and just find the person who can be your successor. Yeah, that will be part of it, and it already has been part of it, partially by finding a successor for her for the biggest business unit. But we started with creating sort of like the image of what does the next generation version of this company look like, business-wise, organization-wise, leadership-wise. How do we create stronger teams that can take more responsibility and ownership for major parts of the business, which makes it easier for somebody else to step in? We selected her successor. We've coached the successor, helped him to create his team. We're now coaching and helping the next level down in that business to take on a bigger role as the company has actually grown. So again, it has business components to it. It's organizational, and that's been a process been going on for 3 years now. It's not over and done. Because she still hasn't stepped down as the CEO of the group, but she has actually stepped down as the CEO of the biggest business unit, which is one of the things we've done. We've created business units in the organization. Anyway, so it's a fascinating story, and it's in a completely different culture, Asia. So all of that is fascinating of itself. But this is an established business, stock listed on the local stock exchange, which is very different from the scale up I was talking about earlier. But once you actually scratch beyond the surface, you will actually find that many of the issues and challenges, well, I'm not going to say the same, but again, the intertwined human business components of it, there's a lot of similarities you will actually find. And this is just another example of something we're still involved in.
And thank you before for inviting me to participate in a small way in that team and having been there with you. When I look back, what I was impressed with about the people that we were working with, and there was, 40, 50 people, in that whole process, actually more, because there was 2 groups. This company is not failing now, financially. It seems to be doing quite well. Yeah, quite well. And they have the foresight to know that they have to reimagine themselves because the market's changing and they're changing and their customers are changing. So it was just a really nice professional blend of, we know we're okay and we are really hungry to discover more, and they were all just leaning into some of these exercises and techniques and things. Sure. It was just a delight to be there. So
I think, Chris, this is it's interesting that you mentioned that, because indeed, if you would look at this from the outside, and again, you would, if you look at the share price and all the numbers, you would actually say business is in good shape. And it is. In many aspects, it actually is. But the people inside, they do feel some of the pain of where they are at this moment in time. And this sounds very negative, but I mean, like, they feel like, come on, there must be a better way of actually doing this. Because, and of course, they're proud of the success and the image the brand actually has in the local market, which is fantastic. But they also know that it takes blood, sweat, and tears almost on a daily basis to get to that point. And they know that somehow it doesn't take much to lose the aura of success, which is sort of back to the beginning of our conversation. So, and this is when you often find inside organizations, people in the business often already have the intuition. Sometimes I do ask executives, I said, if you're going to be successful in 5 years from now, give me the 2 reasons why you will have been successful. If you're going to fail in the next 5 years, you probably already have the beginning of your success as well as the beginning of your failure. You already have in you. The question is, which one will you actually feed? And people inside the business already know this is going to go wrong because of this, this, and this. And they probably also know this is going to go right because of this, this, and this. And it's even fascinating that sometimes in a lot of businesses, failure is not an option. It's one of those famous, words we like to use. And of course, in some way I can relate to that, because there's the option of, hey, we're not, but failure is a true option. It always is. And we often know where we already see the beginning of our failure, so to speak. But the question is, do we find the openness in the organization to actually call it that way and to be dealing with it, rather than actually pretending it's not there while everybody sees it and informally we talk about it, but we never get to that.
I think the whole topic of failure is, in one way, failure is inevitable, because to define failure, I guess, but the business that exists today will not exist next year. So the business model right now essentially will fail. And the question is, will you adapt it and then keep the organization from failing? So there's all these different levels of failure.
Yeah,
and the only way to adapt it is to experiment and learn and discover. And through learning, there are micro failures, which are then called learning moments. And so it's so I think if I'm listening to this and trying to summarize it, it sounds like what you really do is enable people in leadership roles to look at things slightly differently, and then take action, sort of create that confidence within themselves to actually not only see new opportunities or new risks, and then take action based on these new insights. So,
that's a pretty cool summary. I agree. I mean, you know me. I mean, I like sort of concepts, although I try not to get carried away by them too much. But that's what I would call that growth flywheel is about. Seeing, discover. I mean, am I seeing what needs to be seen? Deciding, because I can see many things, but some businesses actually fail to say, and therefore, what does that mean for what we need to do, or what we stop doing? Because that is one of the things that we find hard to do. We'd like to be many things to many people, but sometimes we just can't. So decision, and then you need to once you've made the decision, you need to translate it into concrete actions being done and the critical path to follow. And that whole cycle and loop, which never stops. And therefore I don't like those sort of we make a 5-year plan now. No, I mean, this, your competitors don't care about your time horizon. They will do what they think they need to be doing. And and also the business planning cycle in businesses that starts in September and we need to get it done. I mean, hey, they're not waiting. They will do crazy things. Competitors will do crazy. Customers will do things in February or March. They don't wait for September, October, because you happen to have your planning cycle there. And so it's that continuous process. But you're exactly right. I mean, I like to look at our role is to make them see things, is to make them make up their mind as to how they want to deal with that, and then make sure that they put action behind the choices they actually make. And then embed that into the organization.
Right. Well, we're really almost out of time, and it's not lost on me that you're actually sitting in a hotel, and your lifestyle has been Corona has kept you at home for a while, which has been probably
new experience.
New experience.
Yeah.
How do you maintain your mental and physical sanity while bouncing literally all over the world? And exposing yourselves to different cultures and contexts all the time?
I wish I could say I'm doing that well, to be honest, Chris. I mean, I have actually run at stages of my career into some of those issues. I need to carefully manage my energy at moments in time. Really allow the team to take over more from me, or let others more. I actively work on some energy management, techniques that I've one of my coaches and mentors have actually provided to me. And what I need stimulus myself. So I need time for inspiration. And ironically, the reason I'm here today is part of that process. I'm gonna go to a different place and go out and see a museum or bike or whatever.
Thank you.
It's been my pleasure, Chris.
Learn more at ebullient.com/podcast.